Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to cut through the noise and really get to the core of what matters.
That's the goal.
Today, we're navigating a pretty complex legal situation. It sits right at that tricky intersection of personal law, secular laws, and, well, individual rights.
Absolutely. It's fascinating stuff.
Our mission is to unpack a recent Supreme Court decision. It's got some big implications for how we think about age, consent, marriage, in very specific contexts.
And we're working with the actual court judgments, the legal arguments, and even what the justices themselves said. Real source material.
Okay, so let's start with the Supreme Court's decision. This was Tuesday, August 19th. They dismissed something called a special leave petition.
Right, a SLP, basically asking the top court to review a lower court's decision.
Exactly. And this SLP was filed by the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, the NCPCR. They were challenging a 2022 judgment from the Punjab and Haryana High Court.
Yeah, and the High Court's original ruling is really where this gets interesting. They actually held that a 16-year-old Muslim girl could enter a valid marriage with a Muslim man.
16? Wow.
16. And crucially, the court granted them protection from threats. Their reasoning. It was based purely on Muslim personal law.
Okay.
Specifically, they referenced Article 195 from Mullah's Principles of Mohammedan Law. It states that a Muslim who's of sound mind and has hit puberty.
Which is presumed at 15 under that law.
Exactly. Presumed at 15 is able to marry.
So the High Court used religious personal law, but that seems like it could clash, pretty directly with national laws like the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act or POCSR.
Well, that's the tension right there.
Yeah.
Definite legal friction point.
So how did the NCPCR frame their challenge? What was their core argument against the High Court's decision when they went to the Supreme Court?
Well, they hit that nail right on the head. The NCPCR argued the High Court's ruling basically gave a green light to child marriage. They said it directly violated the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act, that's the 2006 one, and also POCSO, the Protection of Children from Sexual Offenses Act from 2012.
Because POCSO sets the age of consent at 18, right?
Precisely. NCPCR's point was, POCSO says no one under 18 can give valid consent. So how could this marriage be valid under national law? It was a direct challenge on that conflict of laws.
Right. So given NCPCR raised these pretty serious concerns about child marriage and the clash with national laws, you'd think the Supreme Court would dive into that legal debate.
You might expect that, yeah.
But they didn't, did they? They dismissed the NCPCR's plea. Why? On what basis?
This is where it gets quite nuanced. The bench Justice B.V. Nagarathna and Justice R. Mahadevan, they didn't really get into the merits of whether the marriage was valid or not under conflicting laws.
So what did they focus on?
They focused on procedure. They observed that the NCPCR was, and this is the legal term, a stranger to the litigation.
A stranger.
Meaning they lacked locus standi. They didn't have the legal standing or the direct right to challenge that specific High Court order.
Ah, okay. Because the High Court order was specifically about protecting the couple.
Exactly. It was an order granting protection to the life and liberty of that specific couple. The justices even remarked, and this is a quote, "It is strange that the NCPCR, which is for protecting the children, has challenged such an order."
That's a really interesting procedural point. So the Supreme Court basically said, this case was about protection, which was granted. You, NCPCR, don't have the standing to reopen it on broader legal grounds.
That's the essence of it. They sidestepped the bigger question about the conflict between personal law and POCSO by focusing purely on who had the right to bring the challenge at that stage. The priority seemed to be the immediate protection already given to the couple.
So it wasn't a ruling on the marriage age itself, but on NCPCR's right to challenge that specific protection order.
Correct. A very specific procedural dismissal.
Now, you mentioned Justice Nagarathna. Did she add anything else? I heard there was another observation.
Yes, she did. And it adds a really important layer, I think. She stressed the need to differentiate.
Differentiate what?
Between, clear criminal cases under POCSO, actual sexual offenses,
Right.
and what she called genuine romantic cases.
Genuine romantic cases.
Yeah, where teenagers, maybe, as you put it, on the verge of majority, elope because they actually want to marry, not because there's coercion or abuse involved in the way POCSO usually covers.
I see. So acknowledging a different context for some of these cases.
Right. She highlighted the trauma a girl might face if she genuinely loves a boy, they elope, and then he ends up in jail because her parents file a POCSO case, perhaps just to stop the relationship.
That's looking at the human impact, not just the letter of the law. It adds a layer of empathy.
Definitely.
And what happened when NCPCR asked, okay, even if you dismiss this case, can we at least keep the larger question of law open for another day? You know, the conflict between personal law and POCSO.
The court shut that down too. They stated quite clearly, no question of law arises.
Wow. So basically, we're not touching that broader debate in this case.
That seems to be the message. They weren't inclined to use this specific case, which started as a plea for protection, to make a wide-ranging ruling on that very sensitive legal conflict.
Although it's worth remembering, wasn't there an earlier stage? Back in 2022, didn't the Supreme Court actually issue notice on this?
That's true. They did initially agree to consider the question of law back in October 2022. They even appointed an amicus curiae, a friend of the court, to advise them.
But they didn't stop the protection order then either.
No, they let the protection stand even then. So while they considered it earlier, this final dismissal seems quite definitive, at least for this particular legal challenge.
Okay, so let's try and tie this together. What does this deep dive really tell us, especially for you, the listener?
Well, I think it shows the Supreme Court making a very careful, perhaps strategic choice. They prioritized the immediate individual liberty of the couple and used a procedural ground, the locus standi issue, to avoid opening up that much bigger, potentially explosive debate about personal versus secular law in this context.
It's a signal, perhaps, about how the judiciary might navigate these really sensitive areas where different legal systems collide, focusing on the specifics, on individual rights already granted, rather than making sweeping pronouncements.
Exactly. And that leads to the big question this leaves us with for you to think about.
Go on.
How do legal systems, how should they, handle these complex situations where traditional personal laws meet modern universal laws like POCSO, especially when we're talking about young people, teenagers, right on that edge of adulthood?
It forces you to consider the balance, doesn't it? The balance between respecting different legal traditions, ensuring universal protections, safeguarding individual liberty, and maybe even considering the human reality that Justice Nagarathna pointed to.
Precisely. Where does the court draw the line? How much weight is given to individual circumstances versus broad legal principles? There are no easy answers there.
Definitely something I'm all over. That's all we have time for on this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.